Okay. Settle. All right, let's call this meeting to order. I declare the Audit and Risk Committee 24/3 open and mind, prepare the body to achieve what needs to be achieved. Yes. We have an apology from Councillor Murray Benj. So I have a mover and a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Joyce, Councillor Sol. All those in favour? It's carried. Right. Any declarations of interest that anybody needs to mention? No? There are no public excluded items. And so we can move on to the reports. So, first up, welcome to Clint. Thank you for all that you've done for us in your time with us, and all the very best for the future ahead of you. And we do appreciate the changes you've made while you've been here.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Rip into it.
Yep.
Excellent. So firstly, I'll take the report as read, but just as a quick overview and a summary. So we had another good performance from a health and safety and wellbeing perspective over the quarter. No events of note to our people or contracting partners, which is pleasing. Our governance items continue to strengthen, which gives us good assurance that the systems are working across the business, and the behaviours from our people continue to build on the good foundation that we've already laid. So it was really pleasing to see. But if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take some.
Gracious. You've done so well. Stunned them all to silence. Well, it looks like you can go out on a high.
It was very nice on me, the last one. Thank you very much. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll call for a move and a seconder that the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Leads report dated 3 September 2024 be received. Thank you, Councillor Sol, Councillor Thwaites. All those in favour? Right. Yes, carried. Thank you. All the best. Okay. On to 10.2. Peter. Jonathan.
Good morning, everybody. We'll just take the report as read, but just to note, a good content in the report this time around is post the review with KPMG that we had the workshop. So we've updated items as to discussed at that workshop, and happy to take any questions.
So, questions on the... Hey, James?
There's a couple, if I may, Mr. Chair. On page 39, it talks about are we losing institutional knowledge? Is that a real concern for us? I mean, obviously, you always have some level of turnover, and that's fine. But are we really losing that core institutional knowledge? I'd perhaps like some comment on that.
Through the chair. So I think with any role and any function, you have there is a risk that with someone leaving that they do take some of that knowledge with them. What we have put in place as a mitigation strategy is what we call ProMap, which is the mapping of all our council processes, which captures what we do in each of our roles, so that if someone does leave or someone's away unwell or on holiday, that others can pick up their role, and that institutional knowledge, if you like, stays within the organisation as well.
Thank you, Adele. My second question is around the ERP system, and we seem to have been sort of dancing around getting that replaced for a number of years now. And I was just wondering, what is the hold-up? Is it just finding the right system? Is it political will? Is it funding? What's the issue there?
Through the chair, so there has been some provision of, background work that's required to undertake to assess which system we might go with. We are well now advanced on working with the staff for each of our modules of an ERP system to understand what their requirements are. We have got a system that has been made quite bespoke over a 20-year period, so we've had to do quite a deep process into understanding how it all fits together and what we're going to need moving forward. So we're doing that requirements and have got a plan over the next year to undertake a procurement process which will identify who our preferred supplier is, and then it'll be looking to backfill our staff to start the implementation. And then it'll be just the program of works as to how that's managed depending on which preferred option we go for a supplier. But we're not likely to do the Big Bang Theory and do it in a staged approach, just to make sure that it can be well managed by staff, because it is a big project.
Thank you. Are we looking to work with other councils or shared service or anything along those lines? Because I think one of the criticisms was that the 70-odd councils in New Zealand, they all have their own ERP and bespoke software, and that may not be the best way to go. Has that been factored in?
Through the chair, it certainly has. Marion, who's our Chief Information Officer here at Council, has been working with a number of councils that are looking to change over their ERP at the moment and looking at which systems that we could, utilise what the work they've done before. So we have partnered up with a couple of councils in that particular piece of work at the moment and utilising what their background work that they've done, their procurement policies, and looking to even use the same staff in terms of how we do the implementation. So yes, we're certainly in that space of looking how we best do that and make it cost efficient and effective.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor.
Not really a question, but just noting that the addition of risk 9, technology enablement and resilience, it speaks directly to the ERP, and I think it's good that it's been raised to this level of visibility. So thank you.
Councillor Ray.
Sorry, I just wanted to briefly mention security guards at a library centre. Now, I saw an incident play out in Te Puke of a guy dragging his partner outside of the library building, and because it was pouring down with rain, he kind of dragged her into the forefront of the library. But it took for me to tell the security officer that he needed to do something about that before he was prepared to do that. And I would have thought, his job isn't just security within the building. I would have thought that securing the premises around the outside is part of it too. And I understand that he can't intervene, but his job should have been to phone the police. It shouldn't, like he was a migrant male, and he was just standing there chatting with his friends. So he didn't seem very concerned at all. So I just wondered and could I suggest that maybe we try to get contractors who are actually local people, who actually know some of these people who are doing some of the, intimidating things there.
Rachel, can you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Councillor Ray, you do raise an important issue, and sadly in some of our libraries from time to time we do have these types of incidents occur at either end of the district. Going forward, I think your observation around the presence of locals providing this kind of a role is an important one, and to that end what I can advise is that we have got as part of the long-term plan process positions that will be cemented in our libraries, and they will be kaitiaki hapori roles, so they will actually be community guardians. So their function is actually, as you note, not just confined to the library building, but also in and around our town centres, both for Katikati and for Te Puke. Absolutely, they are intended to be local people who have a presence about them. But what we have found is that our security guard roles, which have been an interim measure, haven't always been able to intervene in at the extreme end of some of the situations that sadly occur in our libraries, but for the most part have provided a presence which has settled things down and ensured that we have got calm and are able to provide ongoing good service in our library environments, but appreciate the sad situation you've just described.
Sorry, and thank you, Rachel, for that response. And just lastly, I'm not sure if people are aware, but our Tarnix security people, like, I'm not sure if this is, it's not that bad of a situation, but when he checks the building in his nightly routine, he's parking literally right outside of the door. And that doesn't set a precedence to others that you shouldn't be able to park up on the footpath and, you know, outside of buildings like that. I wouldn't have thought that that's something that our contractors should be doing.
Presuming that can be fed back to. Thank you. So, any other questions or comments on that amended list of, or updated list of risks that have been used to modify our risk registers? No. Good. Excellent. All right. So, oh, sorry, Tracy, yes.
Just, Adele, I know we mentioned this in the pre-meeting, but was there any update on the climate change stuff? Remember we talked about that? Insofar as it's already been said that we're not to consider climate change at a council level or the impacts of, and I know it's not legislation, but we were just going to get an update on that from Adele. Through the chair, so I think we've got, so yeah, Meg took that to that.
So what's the question was, what is local government's obligations regarding climate change?
No, I think it was it Simon Court? Whoever it was said from Parliament that they don't want councils focusing on the climate change aspect like they have been. And whilst nothing's been passed, it was a statement, a little bit like Luxon's one the other day about, you know, the four well-beings, etc. as well. So announcement, but nothing's been passed. But I just wondered if anything had come back through from central government about this.
No change has been made to the legislated obligations of councils at present. So we just still need to be aligned to the statutory responsibilities under the Resource Management Act and under the Carbon Zero Act.
So there's been no communication then at all?
They did release an updated climate change strategy earlier this year, but it doesn't state anything explicitly regarding local government's obligations. It's just reaffirming various aspects of the strategy and the elements that it covers.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, just to reiterate, the government has actually confirmed what their commitment is to climate change and have been really clear about that. They released the climate change strategy in June 2024, which makes it very clear that those obligations that councils have under the Resource Management Act and the Climate Change Responses Zero Carbon Amendment Act, they remain in place. And the government has no intention of changing those statutory requirements that sit with local government. So we'll be continuing to operate in that framework. The climate change strategy is online. It's only there's a summary of it, so it's very easy to see exactly where those requirements fall for local government. Primarily it's around resilient infrastructure, communities being well prepared, and nature-based solutions to addressing climate change challenges. So those are the things that are sort of set out there as the 5 pillars in the strategy, and very much those responsibilities sit not only with local government, but with district and city councils.
Thank you. Lee James.
Just moving on to the corporate assurance framework, I don't know if that's going to be introduced further, but I just noted that it does say on page 49, after each 3-yearly review, the revised framework will be provided to the relevant committee of council for approval. And I didn't notice that there's a recommendation that we approve that. Is this a draft or what's the, are we intending to approve it today, or what was your thoughts?
Through the chair, so ultimately this is an operational how we're going to manage and give you assurance at the council level. So although it said we will approve it, we'll just keep you updated with any changes that we may make to the framework and what we're going to be doing in the background to support the risk and assurance program of council, which you approve as part of the work program.
So it gets approved through a different process of the risk assurance program, is that what you're saying?
So you agree what work program we're going to undertake in terms of our audits for the year. This is the framework that we'll be operating with in the background to ensure that we deliver a program that covers off the various aspects of the wheel.
So just to clarify, why does it say that this framework will be provided for council for approval?
I think that's an error. This is an operational one, so we'll keep you updated as opposed to approved.
Okay, thank you.
Right, okay, so we need a mover and a seconder for the Risk Assurance Manager's report, dated 3 September 2024. Thank you, Councillor Henry, seconded by Councillor Thwaites. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We're going to be through too soon, but anyways, we've got some information for receipt. So, who's presenting this? Jack. Page 52. All yours.
Sorry, red button. The information for the audit for the Emergency Operations Centre has been submitted to be read. I'm really here for any questions that you might have.
Good morning. The talks about key recommendations from this audit. What were those key recommendations that have been incorporated?
So we actually had 19 recommendations from the audit that ranged from minor through to major. Of those 19 recommendations, we've already completed an action 14, and that was since the report was made final about early July. The recommendations ranged from some processes and some procedures which needed to be tidied up a little bit. An example of one is when we have surge staff coming into our district to work in the operations centre, whether or not we had a process to provide EAP, which is the Employee Assistance Program for them, which we have found out that we do, but we didn't have a process to outline that. Some of the major recommendations were around having alternative redundancy internet connectivity, and we didn't have them at the time of the audit because our Starlink was on order. So we've addressed a few of those as well. And obviously now that we have the equipment, we have to make sure we've got the processes to continually test them in a variety of environments.
I just note some of the words here, just that our council clearly has the capability and the capacity to respond, and the combination of knowledge, experience, staff, and continued enthusiasm of the AOC staff to engage in training. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Joyce.
So my question is around staffing. So you talk about 3 rostered shifts of 30 staff, but it could be 7 days. So that's a lot more than 90 people. And you also have a situation, of course, in an emergency where naturally some people won't be in a position to help, right? because they've got home problems or whatever, if they're particularly acutely affected. So how many people are we training up to take it, and how do we plan for the fact that with the best will in the world, not everybody will be able to help at the time of emergency because they have emergencies in their own lives? How are we covering that sort of level of redundancy?
Well, that's a really great question. So in an ideal world, we would have every council staff member trained to be able to work in the Emergency Operations Centre, bearing in mind that we have a lot of staff who aren't trained, who would actually act as our science and technical advisors. So a lot of our utilities team may not have gone through the training for stats, however, they are people that we call to help us. We also would have surge staff that would come in from across the Bay of Plenty, and we have been part of a regional group called Bay 8, where we send a select number of staff to get some additional training, and that's across all the councils in the Bay of Plenty. So we would be also relying on some of them to come in as well. But it would be a problem that's been identified nationally about ensuring we have adequate staff.
So do we have a number of what we're aiming for in terms of training our staff? Yeah, bearing in mind, let's say, 90 staff just for weekday plus weekend, that would add another at least 20 or 30. Plus you've got the ones that drop out. You're up to like 2/3 of our staff already, it seems. And then as you say, the utility staff, we're busy doing the utilities, so you can't drag them into the operations centre. Do you have a target number of how many people on staff you need to train?
The target is a regional target of 90 per council. So that's the target that we are aiming for, but obviously we'd like to exceed that.
Because the other issue there, of course, if there's a big emergency, we won't be able to draw on the regular, just draw us the kind of thing.
Yes, also our communities, ensuring that our communities, I see Councillor Ray here, who is actually our community response team leader for our Te Puke Makatu area. So we are building the capacity within the community because we do appreciate that we can't be everywhere.
And related to that, you've just got a Katikati one set up as well? A Katikati community response team. Are there any gaps that we need to? I mean, I know Waihi Beach one has one, I'm sure Makatu has one, I'm sure Te Puke probably has one, Katikati. Are there any areas that don't have community response teams that worry you?
If you had asked me that a year ago, I would have said yes. But I think we have come a long way in 12 months. And we're creating new teams all the time. There's a new one being developed in Tanners Point, so some of those smaller coastal areas, and also in the Kaimais.
That's right.
Hi, so has there been somebody to replace Richard's role within the Te Puke Civil Defence team?
Yes, there has. Dale Snell has stepped into that space, and I'll be doing some work with her in early mid-October.
Dalley looks paused to ask a question. No? All right. So right. Okay. So there's no motion needed for that one. It's information for receipt. Thank you, Joe, for that and for answering all of the questions. And our friends from Bancorp will be with us in a couple of minutes online. 10 past. 4 minutes. Talk amongst yourselves. All right. We'll officially adjourn for 5 minutes. We have our people from Bancorp are coming online now. Jonathan, are you going to introduce this one?
Good morning again. I'd just like to introduce our consultants from Bancorp who are going to give us a presentation this morning. We've got Suresh Ranchod, who is the Head of Treasury Advisory, and Monica Bibic, who is our Client Advisor. Good morning, Suresh and Monica. Are you able to hear us?
Hello, sorry, just technical issues there. We're just getting organised. Can you hear us clearly?
Yep. Excellent.
Is that a yes, Jonathan?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Right.
Good morning.
Right. Good morning. Now, shall I, obviously it's nearly almost 12 months since we've last done this, so good to be back there, and thank you for just making it a little bit easier with us dialing in this morning. Now, am I able to share the slides, or have you got them there, Jonathan? Or do all the members there have a copy of them in front of them?
If you share the slides and talk through them, that's probably the easiest approach. Suresh, please.
Okay, right. Share screen. Far too many things. Let me see them, Monica. Is that there? September 24.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that all visible to everyone?
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Great. All right. Right. I'll try to keep some of the market commentary as brief and get to the point around what's actually happened with interest rates, which, along with Bancorp and Western Bay Treasury team, we've tried to navigate over the last 12 months. But everything seems to be now going our way. And certainly in the last couple of months, and even this, we're in September, even in August, we engaged in quite a significant amount of hedging to get us back into a policy at rates that we've been waiting for quite some time. So what's happened out there broadly in terms of inflation is in the June quarter, we were still holding up at 3.3. But we are certainly heading in the right direction. And what set the cat among the pigeons in the last month was an update from the Reserve Bank with its forecasts implying that we will be back at 2.3% in the September quarter. So that is taking us down basically to near the midpoint of the RBNZ's mandated target, the midpoint, and as a result, it started cutting the cash rate. So that change of a move, towards that midpoint of 2.3 in its forecast was quite staggering, given that back in May, they thought that we wouldn't be able to get anywhere near there because of the non-tradable inflation remaining sticky. So it was a significant about turn, but I think it's more to do not so much with the actual inflation number, but the wider economy being in recession, about to get worse, etc. And now the focus has moved more from inflation to trying to right the economy that's rapidly declining.
Before you go off that slide, Suresh.
Yes.
The comment at the top of it from
Jerome Powell.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, he has made some statements which have upset things a bit over there and indicated an easing and potentially indicated some more quantitative easing, more money printing, which is going to go up inflation over there and trying to get the economy ticking along for the elections and whatever they want to do over there. And we know that we import US inflation, same as we import all the other US things like, so how sure are we that this is going to keep trending down and not reversing up again based on what's happening in the US?
Yep. Okay. Now, good point. Sorry, I missed that little comment at the top. But one of the reasons that comment is there is that prior to the Reserve Bank actually cutting, markets were really looking to the US to be the leader or the front runner of cutting cycles. And there was a view that Adrian Orr would follow the US once they started. So that's why we have that comment up there that they're about to engage in their first cut. Now, they are obviously having to bring interest rates down, and they're trying to navigate an election, which means, you know, they don't want to be seen to be influencing the outcome of that election, and obviously all the difficulties that are going to come with that one and with Trump, etc., all that sort of stuff. So I think the comment really for the Fed, around the Fed, is they're going to cut the cash rate, right? So I haven't sort of delved into too much about reigniting QE and or all that. They have been unwinding their bond purchase program for quite some time. But I think in the US, they're going to have a soft landing, because that's what they're trying to orchestrate, and they're going to have measured, slower rate cuts. But your point about imported inflation into New Zealand is always probably going to be an issue, I think, for us, because, you know, we rely on oil, all those things around the world that we need, we have to import. And the Kiwi dollar, which has climbed from sort of 58, 59 up to 62.5 currently, still does pose a risk for imported inflation. But, you know, I think when we focus, or where you're trying to get to, is the non-tradable inflation, which includes a lot of things that Kiwis can't do about. Yes, that's imported, but by far, I think the biggest ones have been council rates, insurance, utilities, electricity, gas, and all those sort of things. So I think the focus is on those more than anything that what might happen in the US might influence our inflation problems. Hopefully that answers that question. Right, so poor old households having a real rough time in New Zealand, and I'm sure everybody in the room is well on side there. And we've got a few charts just to sort of put some context around the poor Kiwi household. Retail sales, values versus volumes. This is a chart we find very interesting, and I've got one coming up on a per capita basis. I think all of us know what a supermarket shop is like these days. Now, what it shows is we're spending more money than we've ever spent, and this chart sort of indexed back to 2015, nearly 10 years. But that's the light blue, but the dark blue is the actual volumes with constant prices. So what we're saying is here we're spending a lot more money and getting less for it. Now, the volumes are back to sort of COVID levels. And so, you know, for small businesses that are selling whatever A, B, C, and D, you know, they're not selling a lot of it because the prices are too high. So it's quite concerning that we're spending more money and getting less for it. Now, if you look at it on a per capita basis, this is even slightly more worrying, because over the period since 2020 in particular, we've had a massive migration boom. And so on a per capita basis, our spending is equivalent to what it was nearly 7 years ago, back at 2017. So it just tells us that, you know, this inflation problem that we've had, and people having less money in their pockets, means they are certainly worse off in a spending sense. And this one here takes it back to 2017 levels, well before COVID turned up. That ties into the migration data, which has been important for the whole Bay of Plenty region, with, you know, the huge influx of people that have been moving to that area. Annual migration has started to cool. Now, this chart's an interesting one because it splits it into three components: net migration, actual arrivals and actual departures, and then categorises them into non-New Zealand citizens and New Zealand citizens, okay? So that way, you can sort of gauge how many Kiwis that have lived overseas are coming back or how many Kiwis are actually leaving. Now, the top one there shows, after COVID, we've had a massive migration boom, and now it's starting to tail off. But even in that period since COVID, the number of New Zealanders, we had a spike up when a whole lot of Kiwis came home because New Zealand was perceived safe, as we were COVID-free, carrying on a bit normal compared to the rest of the world. So you can see there was a tip up there in 2021, and now people are starting to leave. And the best way to probably look at that is the bottom chart is departures. That mustard line there, as you can see, has rocketed up since 2020, 2022. It had a little pullback, now it's taken off again. And New Zealanders leaving is at a record high, and of course, most of them to Australia. The chart in the middle shows the arrivals, and that just shows we've had a whole lot of non-New Zealand citizens come into the country, and even that's tapering off. And down the bottom with the departures, you can see that there's even non-New Zealand citizens that are turning around and leaving, right? So the whole migration picture or forecast remains quite difficult to understand. But what we would say for the departures that we've seen of recent is people are trying to, get ahead or navigate cost of living issues by moving to Australia or things like that. And that's certainly playing into our migration data.
Okay, Suresh, we have a question from Councillor Coxhead.
Just on how is a non-New Zealand citizen departure actually recorded? Is it just on a one-way, they're not on a two-way ticket? Is that how it works?
I think it uses, it does take migration, it not necessarily, so if you leave, they don't know you have a return ticket. So the data is people leaving. So of course, say we go on holiday, we go and come back at the same time, that ends up, within a 2-week holiday, that ends up being a 0. If somebody went on a 3 or 4 month holiday, then this data will reflect that as an exit. But it's based on, obviously, through the airport data.
Do we know, I think I know where they'd be going, probably Australia, but do we know where these non-New Zealand citizens have come from?
A huge portion is, I think it is India, Philippines, China, Vietnam popped up, but generally a majority of the Asian areas. And you can get all that data, but then the chart starts to get quite busy. Right.
Do you actually have the data?
Well, I don't. No, I don't. But you can get it if you go through Stats NZ. You can get quite a bit of data.
Thank you.
One more for Councillor Daly.
We can send a link to Jonathan if that will be helpful.
Yep. Right. Next one, house prices. Again, all these.
We have one more question.
Sorry, do they, I know you talked in general terms why they leave, but is there any exit survey or anything which people give their exact reasons why they're leaving?
Not that I am aware of. I'm sure everybody in the room's, done the departure ticket thing. I think it is limited data, but I think when you come into New Zealand as a new migrant, obviously there's a whole lot more forms to fill. But on the exit, I think it is limited. But yeah, no, sorry, I wouldn't be able to think of where we could find that sort of information. And of course, all the information that we're hearing and seeing in headlines is, there was something on TV a couple of weeks ago where there was a whole nurses convention from Australia here looking for nurses, and they were all queuing up out the door, waiting 3 hours for an interview. So, that's the sort of observation, really, I think you sort of take, is that, people are moving to Australia, and from their data, they're recruiting here for starters. Right. House prices, that good old chestnut, the New Zealand love story with houses. House prices are continuing to decline. By all accounts, I think with the various metrics that you can read or find, that house prices are now back at levels that we saw in 2021, not back to pre-COVID. That's still holding up. And of course, the damage of that has been done with the increase in mortgage rates. So the chart on the right actually shows the increase in mortgage rates over time. So I don't know, if you were on a 3% mortgage rate, fixed mortgage, and then you rolled on to a 6 or something, this chart shows how that average across the whole mortgage book has played out slowly. And so at the moment, mortgages are up around 3%. For most people, there's still people coming off some corking, nice little 3% mortgage rates, but that's what's done the damage, right? So house prices have been walloped quite hard, although there's recent reports to suggest that the first cut from the Reserve Bank has, according to real estate agents, has increased interest from first home buyers now that mortgage rates are coming down. But so far, I don't think we've seen a material decline in mortgage rates to start a big boom in the housing market yet. But it is what it is, and high interest rates don't work well for housing markets. Next thing here, this is a bit of a forward indicator. Or just before I finish on that, there was one other point that I wanted to mention at the moment. Just data came out today from the Reserve Bank. So non-performing loans, so people in trouble with their mortgages, has now gone over 2 billion. And as a percentage, we're at an 11-year high for non-performing mortgages, but not yet at levels that we saw during the GFC in 2007. We're still away from that, which apparently was quite bad, but we're at an 11-year high for mortgage defaults and issues playing out there. Now, this is an interesting chart, and this is sort of a forward-looking indicator about the New Zealand economy, right? So some of you there that would have heard me last year, kind of negative, kind of look, rates are peaking, things aren't good out there, things are going to get difficult, and then rate cuts are obviously going to come at the end of that. And so these indicators are sort of the PMI is the Purchasing Managers Indice, and the PSI is the Performance Services Index. And so what these things do is businesses basically have an outlook of how much product they're going to sell, are they going to make a profit, etc., what services they're going to sell. And it's a really good proxy for New Zealand's GDP. Now, they're all sort of screaming out, going, things are tough, we're not going to make a profit, we're going to close up, we might go bust, etc., etc. Sales are down, and therefore the indicators are quite negative. And so this now indicates that we are in another recession. And when I say another recession, this will be the third recession we've had in the last 16 months, because we seem to go negative, then we pop out, and then we go back in. And this aligns with the Reserve Bank's latest forecast that have us at 2 quarters of negative GDP and then to bounce out. So September and December, as far as the Reserve Bank is concerned, we are in recession. And again, this is one of the reasons also with its forecast for inflation is why they've suddenly changed or pivoted to a rate cut. And now we're cutting the cash rate, right? So things aren't that great out there for businesses. Another one there, flipping back to households, KiwiSaver financial hardship withdrawals have increased. Speaking to somebody in that particular sector, all their admin staff have been quite busy with people calling in. I think there's quite a few hoops that you have to jump through to prove that you can withdraw your KiwiSaver because you can't afford to pay bills. So there's some history that you have to show that, you know, you can't afford groceries, etc., etc. But what this shows is this mustard line. The top line shows the values. The bottom line shows the number of withdrawals. And it's the first time, certainly in this chart that goes back to 2016, that hardship withdrawals have now exceeded first-home buyers. So first-home buyers are still taking out money to buy houses, but equally, people are taking out money to pay their bills. Now, I put this one in for interest, more so to give people some insight around productivity, because it always ends up being a conversation about where New Zealand stands around its productivity. It also aligns or is a story that should be referred to when we look at migration. And there was that question about where all our migrants are coming from. And, you know, it appears that, you know, our migration has been really a labour force, bringing cheap labour. And obviously this impacts on our productivity. So what this chart shows is the gross value added per hour and per employee, right? And that's their measure of productivity. Now, we're comparing, and this report was put together by Goldman Sachs and a few people offshore, and New Zealand, I think, really was just put in there to show the extremes, where the focus really was on the US in terms of productivity. So the US is that light blue line, and then the non-US developed markets. So we are considered a developed market, but we're right down there per hour with France and Italy. Well, Italy's not too far away. France and New Zealand stand out there, and equally per worker on the other side. Now, how do you read this? You basically say that since 2019, certainly when this data is looking back, is that New Zealand has performed quite poorly in its productivity. It basically implies we just keep bringing in cheap labour to make the same things, but try to make them cheaper with cheaper inputs, where we haven't really said, well, we've created innovation and robots or anything like that, and using that to increase our productivity. What we're saying is we're using labour, right? So clearly New Zealand is a standout, and for all the wrong reasons. And you see this talked about quite regularly, but it hasn't been in conversation certainly for the last 2 or 3 months. But New Zealand's productivity is pretty poor, right? And our focus really is being just to use cheaper labour. But something to think about for the future. Now, the good stuff, the Reserve Bank has pivoted. I think the key thing to focus on in here is, even in a short term, even back in May, right, which is only a few months ago, when the Reserve Bank announced its monetary policy statements, it still had an upward bias because of non-tradable inflation. And it said, look, hey, there's a risk we might have to go higher, but the risk is only a 50% chance because only about 15 basis points. So I think the market implied that we were going to go from 550 to about 560, right, cash rate. And that cuts would come in end of 25, starting in August 2025, and then getting down to sort of 3% by 2027. Right? Then August comes, everybody's ringing me going, is he going to cut? Is he not? Well, if you base that decision on May, no, he wasn't going to cut. My opinion would have been he probably needs to cut because things are getting quite bad. And lo and behold, he cut. He's brought forward, the central bank has brought forward its cutting cycle. And now we have basically a cut at most meetings till we reach 3% in 2027, right? Now, the markets have jumped ahead. This is the Reserve Bank's chart. They've gone, no, we've got to go harder and faster. right? So they are now saying that we've already done 520 to 525. We're going to go another 25 in October, and likely we're going to have to do a 50 by November, because we have this gap, because between November and February, we don't have a meeting. And then we're going to continue. And by August next year, or the end of next year, we're going to have a cash rate probably close to 3%, right? So that's almost a year and a bit quicker than what the Reserve Bank's projecting. Now, that's the market going, right, we've probably got a problem here. We're going to have to cut rates quick, right? And so these cuts are coming. Now, of course, we've had the first one delivered. The Fed is expected to deliver its cut at its next meeting. And then, of course, this light blue line and the black line, which is us and the Fed, the US, we're pretty much on track. And because Australia has a much lower cash rate than us, they are also going to cut, and we're going to all meet somewhere around the end of 2025 and have a cash rate heading in the same direction. So these cuts are now coming. Now, these are the swap curves, or what we use to hedge or manage Western Bay's interest rate risk. And for those that were in the room this time last year, when we argued that we wanted to be out of policy, and we were out of policy, and if I'm correct, at this time last year, we were going to be hopeful that we were going to lose our water assets and water debt, and we were going to start with a cleaner, much lower levels of debt from at some point. Lo and behold, we had a change of government, and Three Waters disappeared. We do now have something called Water Done Well, which we've still got to navigate. So, our call last year, and that dotted blue line was where swap rates and interest rates were going to be, is very different to where we are today. So our call to stay out of policy has worked, but in the interim, we have been on this move down. We have slowly been adding into the risk profile and doing hedging and doing fixed rate borrowings from the LGFA and also swaps. And I'll get to that very shortly. And this is what the swap curves or the fixed rates basically look like, right? So these rates have now collapsed, and these rates now are at the lowest level. And if we take this little area here, which was in the middle of 2022, was when we had a cash rate around 2.5%. We were still hiking. And then to go much lower than that, we've got to get back towards the start of 2022 when the cash rate was 1%, right? So these swap rates, the market front ran the hiking cycle. We didn't think we'd get to 550, but we did. And when we had this meeting last year, which was around here, you can see all these fixed rates were around 5 or 5.5%. Right, and we argued that, look, this wasn't beneficial for the council to be locking in or engaging in hedging. We'll wait till we get lower levels, and we did, and we've tried to cherry pick these lows at certain times because the council was always borrowing, and we debated whether we do fixed or do we do float. If the rate was good enough to meet policy or to do a little bit to get towards policy, we were happy to do it at fixed. And we'll show you that shortly. Now this, I put this in for fun. This was the swap grid at our last meeting that we had in October 2023. And what you can see there is that 5-year was 534, the 10-year was 538, 2-year was 566, eye-watering. And we roll that forward nearly a year, and we've got threes. We've got 390s, we've got 365s, 385s. Right. So swap rates the back's been broken. That's nearly 2% off. Now it makes it interesting for the council to consider its level of hedging and how much it has, and in terms of where it's positioned in policy. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now here we are. This is starkly different to last year because when we looked at this last year, debt was much lower. I think it was probably I can't remember, but I think our hedging was probably around 50 million. Now we're probably about 75-ish, nearly 80. And we've created this little strip or straight line to navigate these little policy minimums, although we've got a small breach out here, which we're not too concerned about at this stage, because we're still waiting for this LTP to be signed off and approved, which would justify that in 5 years' time we would have circa $300 million worth of debt. Also noting that water done well now under a different hat remains an issue, and where we end up with that and where the council goes with that, with a CCO, with Tauranga or anything like that, still in the air. But this just shows that our plan last year, which we were asked, is what our strategy was, is that when rates come down, we'll get into policy. And even in the last month, with Jonathan and Jackson, we did $25 million of hedging at an average rate of 365, right? And that was and we did a combination of forward starts to give us this little clean line to get above here. My objective is still all this uncertainty around debt, and I'm comfortable having a bit of a straight line through here, because even if some of this debt derails or comes down, we don't end up overhedged, because that's by far a greater risk for me as your advisor, that we don't end up overhedged at rates, particularly when they're ugly. But obviously the rates we've engaged with, which are all under 4% now, and that's why I should probably have this chart following it, is that, you know, when we get somewhere back to where the neutral cash rate is, which according to the Reserve Bank is somewhere around here at 3%, that if we have hedges at 365 or 4, when there's not going to be a huge amount of regret factor from the council, but also a weight on ratepayers, right? But we've still got this cash. Now, this chart hasn't been updated to show the little cut, because we're actually down 25 basis points, but we are on a trajectory to get that down here. And that pretty much sums it up. So open to questions about debt levels, policy positioning, and interest rates.
Councillor Wickers.
Just contemplating the impact of our interest rate and inflation assumptions through the LTP. Will this cause a change in that?
We've just actually, and I wasn't on, Monica was dealing with that email. I think, Jonathan, you'll be able to talk to this, because there was these Burl numbers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So through the chair, we've had an update from Burl, their 2024 intermediary or half-yearly indicators. So those indicators, we're working through how they would impact the LTP. They are indicating that inflation would stay higher for longer, which goes really against what the RBNZ have come out with in the last couple of weeks. So we're working through with Audit what we need to do in that space, and we're doing some sensitivity analysis on how that would impact the LTP.
So
I think, and sorry, it's a bit faint. We've got a few speaker issues, but if I may just add, it's always interesting when you talk about even Burl or anybody, any of these forecasters of inflation rate, CPI, it always goes back to 2. It's just the time it takes to get back to 2. And the logic there is the Reserve Bank will hike or cut interest rates to keep in CPI at 2%. But clearly for the last 2 years, we've seen inflation numbers through everything, cost of construction, everything like that, that weren't 2%. But whatever's going to get modelled is going to be based off where we are currently and how quickly we get to 2%, and how quickly those forecasters' assumptions are made up of how quickly we get to 2%. But the long run is inflation should be 2%.
Yeah, so this will factor into what comes to us at the end of this month. Is that correct?
Yes, so what we're working through with audit at the moment is how close our original assumptions that are currently in the numbers relate to really where the RBNZ see it at the moment. So we're discussing through the best available information for that to come through, yes.
Councillor Coxhead.
Just the exorbitant cost increases we've seen in terms of the construction industry in New Zealand and roading, etc. as well, infrastructure. How do we compare to Australia or the United States and the UK maybe?
Well, I don't have the exact data on that, but I think it's well publicised that New Zealand's infrastructure costs are the worst in the world. So, you know, we just don't have the scale, we don't have the competition or expertise, you could argue, if you're doing tunnels and things like that. But it appears New Zealand is a very, very expensive place to build anything, be it a house or a road. And I think that's quite well publicised. And obviously there's the Infrastructure Commission and all this, I can't remember, somebody in the room might be able to remind me, but you know, obviously there's a lot of conversation going on about this, in particular, even yesterday or the day before, the government's announcement around its infrastructure spend. But it is certainly a focus for everyone, and it is expensive.
All right, carrying on. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, appreciate that you won't have the exact numbers, and maybe this is more for Jonathan, but in terms of, regardless of what audit think about forecasts and so on, and Bill, the very real likelihood of interest costs being significantly lower much earlier, how much is that going to save us on our LTP and rates, for example?
So we've done a small sensitivity exercise regarding our interest rates. So about 0.5% shift downwards over the length of the 10 years of the long-term plan would be $1.5 million for that 10-year period.
Great, thank you.
I think, and maybe just rounding out Andy's question, I think we need to understand the materiality of the change and whether it's worth remodelling everything through the LTP. And we've got two things that will affect that. One is this, and the other one is that was discussed earlier, was the Wakotahi letter that comes through. So we need to look at the materiality, discuss that with audit, and see whether it's worth remodelling everything. We're hoping not.
I just want to add through the chair just a further note to John's comments. You do update your assumptions in an annual plan anyway, so you would take effect of any of those changes as they come through on a more timely basis.
Yeah, that was kind of the point I was making. I agree with John that trying to remodel everything now is probably more, yeah, you won't have time. But in terms of what things look like for the next annual plan and that stickiness of trying to get that rates rise down, hopefully that gives a little wiggle room, should we say, for next year.
Right, any other questions for Suresh before we let them? Yeah, one. Councillor Daly.
Just going back to the comments about productivity, I was just wondering why is New Zealand lagging in productivity? I mean, what does New Zealand need to increase their productivity? Is it more investment by big business, or I know the government sort of have a focus to try and upgrade the productivity of the economy in general, and certainly our economic development partner, Priority One, it's one of their main focuses, attracting, you know, more high-tech businesses to the Bay. But, you know, obviously we're a horticultural economy, and the workers are the focus at the moment, but sort of what's lacking? What's Portugal doing differently?
I think that question's probably way out of my range, but I'll be honest on that. And I think we need to leave that to the politicians to work that out. But, New Zealand, fundamentally, and we do a lot of work in the Bay of Plenty, and it's mainly predominantly horticulture and exports. And, I think those markets we've developed as much as we can. I mean, kiwi fruit is a stellar product, the way it's the rights around it, you can only have one zestberry. And that's a good example of it, and even Fonterra to an extent. But I think, are we peak in terms of horticulture? I'm not 100. We are, I think, when it comes to dairy and meat, given some of the issues we have around the environment. But to be more productive, I think we need to be more innovation. We need more rocket labs. We need things like that and tech. But it's always difficult with those sectors and industries because they're quite mobile. They don't need to be in New Zealand, and that's part of the problem. And, whether we go down the road of what Ireland did, and this is only my opinion, many, many years ago, is use tax breaks and to encourage people to come here and operate and do their businesses. And I mean, Peter Jackson is a brilliant example of how, we've been able to do that. Even stories of, I do vaguely remember, when he was trying to transport the files up to the US, they had jets taking them up because they didn't want them going over the internet until they got a dedicated line through the underwater tunnel to send high amounts of data, obviously in these high definition movies. And that was very good for New Zealand, but we need more things like that. I can't think of us as just a horticultural farming type economy, but we need innovation. And that only happens if productivity is lifted, I suppose, in those sectors.
And I guess partly just to add to that, just in terms of financing as well. So where things are invested. So I guess if we look at our banking sector, predominantly weighted towards, the mortgage as opposed to the business lending. So I guess if there's more investment into businesses, then that enables them to likewise invest into their business and to look at more innovative ways to do things. And I'll kind of second what Suresh said, that we need more high tech innovative companies such as Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, where the product is being exported globally, so we can grow that pie for New Zealand.
And just on that point, what Monica said, 2/3 of all bank debt is mortgages.
That's a nice segue to the next question from our local innovator. Thank you. Councillor Wickers.
Just giving some insight into the hurdles within the horticulture industry is that to do automation in post-harvest, you've got to recoup it in a third of a year. So we've got to be 300 times better than businesses that operate all year round. So that is very, very challenging to get the return on investment to actually make it worthwhile. And in the orchard environment, which does operate more of a year round, the actual environment and the variability just make automation so difficult that it's easier to import cheap labour.
Just a follow-up question. What's the correlation between unemployment and the productivity figures that you gave? I mean, is there a detrimental effect on unemployment with those high productivity countries?
They're not included.
I don't think that data is available. I can't really comment on that.
Thank you.
All right, well, if there's no more questions, thank you very much, Suresh and Monica, for joining us this morning. Well, yes, still this morning. And with those insights, and we'll let you get on with your day jobs.
Thank you very much. And just one final thing, I'd just like to thank the council for allowing us to be out of policy and following our direction for the last 12 months, because, we can take a deep breath now in terms of interest rates for a wee bit and just, we'll navigate that once these cuts sort of gain momentum. Just noting that it's only one cut's been delivered so far, but, there's a lot more to come.
Thank you.
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Bye.
Aye. All right, so I think at that stage we don't need a recommendation for that one, so we need a recommendation to move into public excluded. Thank you. Councillor Coxhead, Councillor Thwaites.